Recently, a PhD emailed me this question. Once you transition into industry, it's not always clear what you should do to grow and to get to the next step. What advice would you give to someone who is 2 to 3 years in industry and wants to grow? Where do you start? More certifications, networking, what else? I got this question about 3 months ago and I posted it on LinkedIn, and people were super, super kind in the responses. And so on today's episode, I'm going to read some of those responses and my thoughts on them. The very first one I'm going to read is from Angela Coy, PhD, who says that get to know your cross-functional colleagues, what their job responsibilities are, where your work overlaps. Having a good grasp of the interdependencies in industry will help you see how small decisions can have a broad impact on the business. And I would say that I absolutely agree with this. I really appreciate Angela for sharing this. It is important once you're in industry. One of the things you're going to find very, very quickly, especially if you join a larger company. And when I say a larger company, what I mean is a company that's like 1,000 people or more, you will find that there are cross-functional people that you end up working with. You have other teams. You're not going to just be on a team by yourself, just focused on one thing. A lot of the time, projects are executed by multiple different teams, right? And so really understanding what your colleagues on another team do is going to be really important. Let me give an example of this. So as a scientific writer, when I worked at a bigger company, I work at a much smaller company now, a much smaller department, and I still have to work with like the scientists, but I primarily stay within marketing, but I have different people that I have to work with. Anyway, when I was at a much bigger company that employed over 100,000 employees, my role sat in the middle of marketing and research and development, which meant that I was sort of a liaison between the two teams. So the scientists would say something over here, the marketing teams would say something over here, and I'd have to communicate across those two teams. I also usually had to meet with product managers, right? So my team worked on developing these workflows for CAR T cell therapy. That's just a type of cell therapy that is available for cancers. And they had to work on the workflows for manufacturing those. But then in manufacturing those, there were different instruments in that workflow. And so I would have to talk to the product manager for each of the instruments. So let's say there were 5 different instruments. I would have to talk to and know about 5 different product managers and chat with them. So when you are in a role, right, it's not just you. It's when you get in industry, you realize it's not just you executing one project by yourself. You have to interface and interact with so many other people. And I find that it is really a rich environment. If you find yourself in that kind of situation, it's a rich environment to talk to people about what they do, right? To maybe shadow them a little bit, because one of the things that's really difficult to do is get the opportunity to shadow people when you do not work at a particular company. I don't know if you've tried this, but it can be very, very difficult because companies are very protective of their intellectual property. And so they don't just let anybody come in unless you're doing like an internship or you work there. It is important to talk to people about what they do. And you don't have to do this immediately, but as time goes on, you can set up meetings with people. And I did this quite frequently, set up meetings with people and get to know what their job function is, how they got into that job function, and maybe how you can translate, just like you translated your skills, remember, to get the job you currently have, how you can get into that type of job. And so maybe you're a research and development scientist in a lab right now, but maybe you're interested in scientific communications or regulatory writing or regulatory affairs, right? Go find those people and chat with them. And even if those people are not people that you work with directly, I find that if you can easily find people's information on the company, directory, you can reach out to people directly and say, I see you work in regulatory affairs. I see you work in this field or this area. I'm really curious about it. Could I chat with you? So that's one way to get started, is really finding out what other people do and talking to other people so that you get to know those jobs and if you're interested in them. This episode of the Bold PhD podcast is sponsored by my own book, Navigating the Pivot. I wrote this book for PhDs who want to successfully transition out of academia into jobs outside academia and thrive in those jobs. And I also wrote the last 2 chapters on how to create your own opportunity engine, because the reality is that the world of work as we know it is shifting, it's changing. And so yes, I completely support your transition out of academia, and this book will guide you on how to do that. But beyond making that transition, beyond making that switch, how do you thrive so that no particular employer controls your job destiny? I cover that in the last 2 chapters of this book. So I highly encourage that you grab it or grab it for somebody who's planning on making a switch and wants to thrive afterwards. Let's get back into the episode. Okay, this next answer is from Summer Kim, and Summer's great. If you can definitely find her on LinkedIn and follow her. I think she's also on Instagram. But Summer said, one thing I would say is to remember the big benefit of working in industry is that you can pivot again. So if you want to pivot again, it's possible. And I absolutely agree with her, right? So once you transition, don't think that, oh, I'm stuck in this role for the next 10 or 20 years. You can definitely pivot, right? Look through different job postings and see if new skills you have learned in industry opens up more doors for you. I love that response because a lot of the time we can get very siloed in what we're doing. Even when you're working with cross-functional folks, it's very, very easy to get comfortable, right? Because now you know what the routine is. Especially after 2 to 3 years, you know what the routine is, you know what to expect. Even if there are challenges in the job, you know how to circumvent them, right? And so you can easily get comfortable and stay in one position. I know I have a tendency to do this, right? I'm very, very oh, if this thing is comfortable, then why rock the boat? But the really great thing to know is that especially with everything that is changing around us, you can change too. So as you get to that 2 to 3 year mark, look at different job postings and then see, again, if you've developed new skills, because you're definitely going to develop new skills, see where those skills may fit. Let me give you an example of this. So I've been in scientific communications, mostly as a science writer for the last 5 years, right? And my job has been in and around science writing, creating content strategy, creating marketing strategy. And that's what I do. I know how to do that. Recently, though, I've been thinking, okay, how else can I use these skills? And so I actually went into ChatGPT and I asked it, okay, based on these skills that I have and what my resume looks like, what other types of roles could I potentially apply to? Yes, you could stay on the one path and then progress that way, but you can also make what they call, I think, a lateral pivot, which is you're not moving up per se, but you're moving into a different type of role that harnesses your skills and also challenges you. So if you're that type of person, if you're the other kind of person who likes to stay in one place and just grow, that's fine. But it's also really important to realize that you can pivot and look at other doors that are available to you based on those new skills that you have learned, right? So, and then also I realized that as you talk to people, something I didn't say when I was talking about the first point, as you talk to people, right, you will learn about skills that you don't have. If a skill intrigues you, go ahead and either learn that skill or ask to be exposed to that skill or ask to be given a responsibility that allows you to develop that skill, right? If you get comfortable, unfortunately, you can get comfortable and stay in one place, but the way the world is moving these days, I think it's really important to just look at how your skills can be used in different ways and also what other skills you can add to your toolkit to help you get ahead. Jennifer Polk left a response. Jennifer Polk is also pretty popular, and she's been doing this way, way longer than I have, up there in Canada. She is an academic escape and clarity coach for PhDs. And she says to start with defining grow for yourself. And I think that this is really important. Maybe this should have been the first point, right? What exactly are we talking about here when you say grow, right? Are you looking, and this would go back to my comment on Summer's response, that are you looking to grow upwards? That is, you are in a science writer position and then you want to become a senior science writer, and then maybe you want to go into becoming a director for scientific communications. Do you want to go that route? Is that what growth looks like for you? Or does growth look like, okay, I've been a science writer for the last 5 years. How else can I use my skill? I don't necessarily want to be a manager, but I want to try something else. And so let me move laterally into that type of role. So I do absolutely agree here that defining growth for yourself, right? If you get to that 2 to 3 year point and it's like, I want to grow. Okay, well, really sit down. Just like I'm always saying that, introspect on what your skills are, what your strengths are, and what you think you would like to do. This is a place for you to introspect. I feel like the career building journey is just a series of you checking in with yourself. Unfortunately, though, I think we get caught up in the day to day and like the motions, and we never really sit down, or a lot of us. I know, well, maybe I'm speaking for myself. I don't know. Let me know. A lot of us don't really sit down and check in with ourselves and ask ourselves, does this path still bring me joy? Am I still excited about this? Am I still excited to do this? Or has it become monotonous? And maybe you like that monotony and that's okay. But if you don't, then maybe you want to define something else for yourself, that you want to move into something else that does ABC. Or maybe there's an aspect of your job that you absolutely love and you like to go deeper in that. So I absolutely agree with Jennifer here that you start with defining what grow means for yourself, and then you lean into your strengths, your talents, the values, right? And then move towards that. Now, in the original question, the person had asked if, more certifications would be necessary. And to be honest, I'm not a big fan of certifications. I think they can help. I think that if you do not have foundational knowledge in a specific area, a really good example of this, there are two organizations that I think about often, the American Medical Writers Association, AMWA, and also there is a certification called, I think, the BCMAS for medical affairs. So AMWA certification is the medical writer certified for medical writers, and then you have the BCMAS for the medical affairs people. And these are two very popular certifications in this space. And people can go get that and it can help them get a job. But usually when you're getting a certification, in most instances, when you're getting a certification, all it really is doing is giving you foundational knowledge of the field, so that when you write your resume, when you go into interviews, you can communicate like what happens in that area, right? You know the problems they solve. You've encountered real cases because of the certification that you took. So I believe a certification in most instances, not all instances, please don't take my words out of context, because I know some people like to do that. I'm just saying that most of the time, certifications are a way for you to have foundational knowledge, right, in a structured way, and you pay for that. However, if you have a PhD, for instance, you have almost everything you need. And so if you want to go get those certifications to give you that foundational knowledge so that you can feel confident about yourself, definitely do that, right? But I don't think that more certifications are necessary for growth after you make a transition into industry and you've been there 2 to 3 years, right? I don't think it's absolutely necessary. And this is reflected in Nicole Bowen's response that she gave. And she said, depends on the industry and your overall career goals. For some industries, additional certifications don't have much value. I absolutely agree. In others, they do, right? And so again, this is all context dependent, and your employer may sponsor them. So if your employer sponsors them, then absolutely take it. For instance, one certification that I've seen coming up again and again in different job descriptions I've looked at for scientific writing has been the CMPP, which I think it's a Certified Medical Publications Professional. I've noticed that this is common in a lot of job descriptions. I don't know if companies are sponsoring their people to get this. But if, you start realizing that, okay, every single job description I look at, there is this certification that says ABC certification preferred, then maybe you can look into that. But if you're already even in industry, your company may sponsor that. And so look into that, ask about that. So yes, while a certification could be useful, I find that it's not always necessary. The other point the person had brought up in their question was, should I network more? And Nancy Frischberg over here kind of commented on networking. She said, I'll add myself to the networking camp, catch up with people who have been good to you so far, give yourself permission to define a new direction you might pursue, network with questions prepared, but also be prepared to be surprised. So yes, I think networking is a great tool to use here, especially if you're looking to grow in a certain way. So networking is still important. And now that you've been in industry for a few years, you even have an advantage to the point where I was making about now you're in a company, you can go look up people's roles, or you can go just look up people and get in touch with them. This is a great place for you to do that. And so, yes, networking is important. I think networking is important all throughout your career, right? It's not only when you want to make a career change. I think even if you want opportunities to work on projects that maybe are not typical to your role, but then you're really interested in them, people can be happy sometimes to add you to projects so that you can gain experience in that area. So yeah, why not? Like, go ahead and network. And in that same networking bucket is something that Liz Heisler said. If your company has employee social groups, join those. Usually companies have these groups called employee social groups, and they're social groups for different life circumstances. For instance, I remember when I worked at Thermo Fisher, there was an ESG for like the family, or employee resource group is what they were called, ERGs. And you would have some for parents, you'd have some for people that were caregivers, you had some for people that were military veterans, and it was a place for people to go and identify with people that, had similar life circumstances, and they were great for community and career building. And so if your company has that, I absolutely recommend. I attended a few events actually for the women's ERG, I think, when I was at Thermo Fisher, and those were nice. So it's a really great place to do that. Ask your manager to help you find a mentor. If you cannot reach certain people directly, like certain people are really high up on the ladder and a simple email may not do, although I say send the email first, right? But if you're unable to reach them, maybe you can ask your manager about, tell them your goals and then let them help you find a mentor, or let them scout out a project. So at a certain point, whilst I was at Thermo, and I keep going back to that because that's the biggest company I've worked at. And a lot of these answers kind of pertain to more bigger companies, although you can do a lot of these at the smaller companies. And again, the definition of a bigger company would be any company that has above 1,000 employees. A smaller company usually is like 100 to 500. The dynamics are kind of different. So this is why I keep going back to Thermo. Over there, I remember I talked to my manager about wanting to supervise interns. I didn't get to supervise interns. I ended up being laid off from that job towards the middle of 2025 because, they were doing employee cuts and I got affected. So I never got to do that. But when I had discussed this with him, he was very, very open to allow me to hire interns when the time came to hire interns. Your managers are usually, sometimes it's not always the case, usually your biggest advocates, and you can definitely talk to them about getting a mentor, about being on certain projects. You can also volunteer for projects, right? If you find a project that you enjoy, volunteer, see if those colleagues will allow you to follow them around. If you already are at that company, they usually will allow you to do that. Another answer that had to do with networking was this one from Michelle Franco, who said that one of my biggest lessons was that we need to build relationships with scientists all across the industry continuously throughout our careers, rather than focusing on networking when looking for a new position. Amen. Yes. I've said this for years, that build your well before you need to drink from it. And maybe for all the modern people, who don't know what wells are. A well is a big hole that is dug in the ground to hit the water table so that you can actually get water out of it. The worst time to dig a well is the moment you need it. It's like the worst time to build a well. But when you build the well, then the well is available for you when you are actually thirsty or when you need water to do something. You have the well available and ready for you. So I absolutely agree that don't wait until you need this to build it. Build it continuously. And that's why I was saying that, if you already find yourself at a company, go talk to people. Right? Go find out how you can find mentors. Go volunteer for projects. Doing all of this builds your network. It grows your network. Your circle of people that you know grows. And those circle of people can bring you opportunities, whether that is inside of the company or ultimately outside of the company, right? So don't just focus on your work. I say this all the time. Don't just focus on your work and be like, I'm here to work. I'm just focused on my work. And just don't be focused on what you're doing, right? Don't be so siloed and so my head is so down that you don't lift up your head up to see what else is going on. So yes, the community came through and gave some amazing advice, and this is the gist of what most of them said. So yes, I do think that networking is important. I think it's going to be one of your biggest levers, and so don't hesitate to build relationships with people. Don't hesitate to ask questions, to shadow people. I definitely think that there's a lot of value in that. Don't hesitate to use your manager as as somebody that you go to regularly to ask questions and share your dreams and goals with, which you should be doing anyway. That's what your manager is there for, right? As a people manager, he should be or she should be thinking really about helping you move on to your next opportunity. That's what a good manager does. And I would say that be known. Don't be afraid to be known. When you go into meetings, speak up. If you agree with an idea, say it. If you disagree with an idea, find a way to communicate that, in a very good way. But one of the things that I say is to never leave a meeting without letting your voice be heard, right? Or without contributing something. This is the way you get known. You may think that, oh, I just gave that little comment and it's just that. But no, usually if there are a lot of people in the meeting, usually it catches people's attention. So don't be afraid to do that. But the way that you made this transition into industry is not going to be super, super different from how you make another pivot once you are in industry. The difference here is that now you're in, right? And now you know how it's kind of like the politics that goes on. You kind of know the hierarchy of things. You kind of understand who you can go to for help and advice. And so now that you know that, go to those people, utilize those resources.